I'm Mark Stallybrass, and I was formerly the president of Canadian Motorsport Racing Corporation and Stallybrass Promotions Inc. as well. I started with Canadian Motorsport Racing Club, which was non-profit, but then we turned it into a business. So it was both CMRC, but different. Wow. I actually had two cousins in Vermont that raced, and I went down there and went to one of their races. We actually drove over to Connecticut, and the older one, they were actually both really good. So that's kind of where I got my taste, and I also rode my younger cousin's bike. Then it was I don't even know what it wasn't a Japanese brand, but anyways. I have a picture and me riding around their farm, and I had shoes and shorts on, and that was it. My first ride. So that was my introduction, and then after that I was pretty hooked on it. You know, I've got three brothers, and they all rode bikes. None of them motocross, but I was always interested in motorcycling. But after that time down in Vermont, which I think maybe I was, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old, something like that. That's when I got the bug. I started riding when I was about 13 because I bought my own bike, and I didn't start racing until maybe I was 15 or so, 15, 16, because I didn't have the money and I was financing the whole thing. But I started following it back then, and you know, my number one idol is Bob Hanna, and back then, which was like 78, 77, 78, somewhere around there, he was the man, and I just had my nose in dirt bike and motocross action, and I was more of an enthusiast then, and didn't really start following the Canadian scene until, let's say, 1980 or so. Well, at the time I was working at Yamaha Motor Canada, and at that point, that was 87, and motocross was going downhill at the time. You know, like as I said, in the early 80s, it was fairly big, you know, on the amateur level as well as the pro level. But then it just you know, whether it was the economy or what, but bike sales went down, participation went down. And when I was at Yamaha, I was contacted by Stu Peters of CMC, Continental Motorsport Club, and he was telling me about his plan to come into Canada and start marketing the sport. And I basically said, that's exactly what we need. And so I went down to California after a little while, and I proposed to him about running CMC in Eastern Canada, because Connie Fournette was doing it in Alberta. And at the time, CMA was sanctioning races across the country, but there was no marketing, nothing really, no motivator for people to want to race. So that's when I came up with the bright idea to start my own organization. No, it was definitely a step-by-step, and I guess the biggest challenge in Ontario was going against the promoters that were pro-CMA. So they did everything they could to not make my racing successful. So that was the biggest challenge. And as far as my vision goes, it developed as it went. You know, like at first I wanted to get things together in Ontario, and then from there, that's when I expanded. I think in the early 90s, we went into Quebec, and then I think I think we went to Nanaimo and Edmonton for nationals there, and then, and then the whole amateur part followed along with it. I think the whole regions came on board because the regions saw things going nowhere as well, and then that's when we expanded, into BC. I think at first it was the island, then the mainland, and then Alberta wasn't too far after that, and then eventually everybody just came on board. On the amateur side, I would say on the amateur side it was around 2010, 2012, in that period right there. I remember at Gopher Dunes there being 900 entries, and in Quebec and Alberta and BC they were getting their record number of entries. So I would say about that time, even before that, like in Ontario, I know in mid 2000s on up, it was really good, and then in 2008 came the recession, and that kind of put a damper on things. But yeah, as far as, like I said, as far as the amateurs go, around that time, I think it was about the best, and then it kind of leveled off from there, or even went down a little bit. But as far as the pros go, the best time, the best year, I think, were my last 2 years in 2016 and 17. We had 10 races, 5 East, 5 West, television coverage, internationally. We had teams. We had probably 10 or so tractor trailers in the pits. Top name riders, like we had in 2016 we had Davey Millsaps, Michael Lessie, and then along with Colton and the Canadians and so on. And then in 2017 we had Chris Purcell, who was a world champion, 250, I think, 250 world champion, from France. So it was just, well, that was kind of the peak, because every year the goal was just to make things bigger and better. And we had achieved that. We, as in my crew, I can't take all of the credit, obviously, starting with my wife that worked for me from day one. But, Mark Travers, Brian Coster, who are our TV guys, but Mark helped with a lot of behind the scenes. He worked like a dog. And Wendy Snellgrove, who ran the administration, her and Susan Harris and Lisa Snyder, they were a big part of it. So we had probably the best crew, the best staff, or best team at that point. And yeah, 2017, 16 and 17, they were amazing. But even going up to, like, every year, as I said, every year it was getting better and better. There was more teams, more riders, higher profile riders. It was quite good. Well, I won't really say rivalries. Like, it was good to see Colton do what he did with the level of competition that he was facing. But just overall, I really enjoyed the racing. Had to go through a lot of BS to get to that point. But anyway, just as far as the racing goes, it was like, for God, 20, I'd say 16, 17 years, the racing was really, really good. So, being an enthusiast of the sport, and I raced myself, so it was good. It was really good. But like I said, seeing Canadians like Dusty Klatt, JSR, and Colton, and Kevin Benoit get up to that level, it was amazing. In fact, I'll give you another Motocross the Nation story. I think it was 2015. Kevin Benoit was, he had won the MX2 championship. Anyway, he was racing in, no, I think it was the same year, 2016. And Kevin was racing, and on, I think on the main, on the Sunday, he was actually second or third. And to be quite honest, I got really emotional, and I was almost crying, just because I felt so proud of him, and it just really just showed where Canadian racers were. So that was, like I said, I was really proud at that time. One story I had with Brian was in 2016, I went over to the Motocross the Nations in Italy with Paul Kingsley, and we were at this practice track where all the teams were there. And it was right across from this airport. Anyway, Roger DeCoster was there. So I started talking to Roger DeCoster, and he was telling me the history of the track and how there used to be a GP there, and he won the GP and so on. And I told him that we were from the Canadian National. He goes, "Oh, Canadian National." I said, "Yeah, your boy did well this year, Davey Millsaps." And he says, "Yeah." He says, "I've been hearing a lot about it. I hear you're starting to get a lot of spectators, and things are getting really big." And I thought, wow, is that ever a compliment? So, you know, that's basically was saying that Canada was on the motocross map. No, I was in it long enough that I don't need to follow it. You know, all I have to hear is just kind of reports of what's going on. So, you know, unfortunately now there is really no national sanctioning organization. And that was my biggest fight in all the years, was keeping the country together. And it wasn't a financial thing. It was a matter of having consistency from BC right through to the Maritimes. You know, class structures and rules and the format of regionals and provincials, national championships, the WCAN, the ECAN, you know what I mean? We structured all of that, and it was all, and everybody kind of, I'll say, went through the system to get to those events and follow it that way. That doesn't exist right now. From what I understand, there's, and you know, that's really not good for the sport. And I'll give you an example. The same thing happened in the early 80s with road racing, where there wasn't a national sanctioning organization. There was a national series, but there was race in Ontario, and there was CMA, and I think there was a different one in Manitoba. So nothing was consistent, and road racing kind of fell off. You know, the nationals kept on going, but even they lost their lost a lot of interest in that. So I think I looked at that, and that's why I really fought for having the country staying under one umbrella. And it worked. You know, it worked because, you know, like as I said, the amateur nationals, all of the amateur nationals, and the other thing too is, you know, you have a grading system where you go from, you know, I'll say the bigger bikes, beginner, junior, intermediate, then pro. So you work up to it, and you know, you have to kind of dedicate yourself to be at that level to work into the pro class. So, you know, as it is right now, I don't know. I'm not going to say it's one way or the other because I don't know. But I just, from what I understand, there isn't a national organization. It was, you know, towards the end, you know, on the regional side of things, on the CMRC side of things, it was just getting way too political. You know, on one side, you know, we had the regions, which the regions wanted more. You know, and I think that a lot of people saw the success of CMRC and the nationals, and well, I'll give you the Canadian lobster syndrome is what I was told by a friend at a dealership. Whereas you put a bunch of lobsters in a bucket, and then one tries to crawl out and the others drag it back down. So that was a lot of the call it politics or resentment, whatever you want to say. But because things like, hey, I was doing well financially, and that's kind of the goal when you start a business. Yeah. You don't want to be on the brink of disaster all the time. So, that went well, and I think there was some, like I said, some resentment in that. So, and then there were track owners that they wanted the success, but they weren't getting it. So then they formed groups to go against me, and it was just a fight all the time. And it just got to the point where it was like, enough's enough. And there was my side on the national side, and then on the administrative side, the insurance and so on with CMRC. That was where Jan, my wife, took care of that, and it was just very, very stressful. And even though I kept my blinders on, I kept on going forward in terms of the nationals. It was just time. It was just time to get out, which was unfortunate because I wanted to keep on going, and I wanted to keep growing, building on the series and making it a better series. With better TV and more, like, not better TV, but better coverage, increasing purses, and attracting more corporate sponsors, and more teams, and so on and so on. But unfortunately, everybody wanted more now, and it couldn't happen that way. They, as I said, people were kind of resentful that things were going well for me, but they didn't see when, first of all, when you're a promoter, you're putting your ass on the line every race. If it rains, you're screwed. So people didn't see when they didn't come up to me and hand me more money when I was losing $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 in a day. So, but when the money comes in, then they're like, whoa, this shouldn't be happening. You must be screwing us somehow. So they were basically sold a dream, and the dream didn't come through, and now they don't have what they had. So, that's too bad. On the amateur side, you can only do so much with the amateurs. But one thing I'll say is, when I started, honestly, before I even started, I said that you got to have the beginners to have and the pros and everybody in between, and you got to have the beginners to make up, not the beginners, but your beginners, junior, intermediate, to make up to everybody strive to reach the pro class. And my example was, everybody wanted to be Wayne Gretzky, but there was only one Wayne Gretzky, and that was kind of the same with Canadian motocross. There was only, at the time, my time, there was only, Ross Peterson, Alan Dick, but Ross was the man, and then there was Carl Valancourt, and then JSR, Blair Morgan, Colton, Dusty, and so on. So what I wanted to do with the nationals, other than build them up to the point where they deserve, is I wanted to use it as a marketing tool to give kids something to shoot for. Because in the late 80s, there was nothing. There was really nothing to shoot for. Like, Ross wasn't even riding then. So it just the CMA Nationals were not very attractive, shall we say. So I could get into further on that, but I'll spare you. Would I change anything? No, not really. I'm quite proud of what we accomplished from where it started. You know, well, actually, you know, go back to my first race. I had one race in it was called Eagles Nest Raceway in Ohsweken by close to Hamilton. I had one race in 1990, and you know, it just went. That's when I planted the seed, type of thing. So it didn't grow in leaps and bounds right away, because, to be quite honest, I never took out a loan. I never took out a business loan. It was always, if I didn't have it to spend, I wouldn't spend it. So, you know, it was a building process, and I think it's a good thing that it didn't go too fast too soon, because that's when you trip and fall. So, and you know, same thing, you know, call it with, you know, with Walton, it was the same thing. And then that, with the success of Walton, then we went into the E-can and the W-cans, and even like for instance at Deschambault, you know, it started small, and then it just grew every year it grew. And that's really how it went with all of the racing, you know. And you know, going back to the nationals, you could just see that every year there was another step, another team, better TV, more money on the line, you know, better tracks, more sponsors. In fact, the riders, like I know Chris Purcell. People probably don't know this, but he made over $1 million that year. So that's a lot of money for racing Canadian nationals. Davey Millsaps, I don't know how much he made, but he did well. You know, guys like Colton, he was being paid well from Honda Canada at the time. You know, the manufacturers were putting a lot of money into the racing, and the reason why is because they had all this exposure. You know, whether it was television and radio and newspapers and magazines and so on, social media as well. Everything built up, and that's, you know, you're not going to jump on a wagon that's not moving. So they jumped on. Honestly, when it comes to amateurs, in fact, I've got a neighbor who's, and I, you know, anyway, a new neighbor, and because I'm new, and his kid races, and he's like, oh, you know, I gotta put money into this and get the bike faster and do this and do that, and I'm like, you know what? And you know what I was told when I said the same thing? The guy says, if you want to go faster, go practice. A pipe's not going to make you faster. A top end's not going to make you faster. But I think the number one thing I can say is to everybody, even if you're the latest greatest, go have fun. Have fun, man, because you're not going to, like, you know, look at the percentages. Look how many Canadians are actually making a living right now. Like even Colton's not retired. He didn't make millions. He was doing well, but there's one guy, or let's call it 3 guys or 5 guys. That's what it comes down to. Like, yeah, you know, it's cool to win races and to get all of the attention and glory and stuff like that. But really, at the end of the day, your parents are going to be broke because it costs a lot of money to do this. And you know, once your career's over, like what do you look at? A trophy case? Great. You know, you also look at a bunch of scars that you got, me included. I got a whole bunch of them. When it comes to racing, it's either you do it or you don't. If you're not going to put in 100% or 110% and train your ass off and practice and eat right and do anything and everything you can, then don't expect yourself to be the best. That's kind of that applies to all sports, but especially with motocross. You know, there's a lot of people that are fortunate because they have parents that support them, and they have race bikes and practice bikes and trailers and shit like that. Like, Christ, I used to go to races in my mom's Duster. It was a Dodge Duster, if anybody it was a 76 Dodge Duster, and I used to put my bike on bike racks. And I remember this one time when it was pissing down rain at one race, I had the trunk over my head, and I was looking out at Dave Beatty, who had his parents' motorhome and a trailer, and his dad was pressure washing his bike. No, I didn't have any of that. So anyways, getting back to it, you know, if you're not going to give 100%, if you're not going to dedicate yourself to working out, to not drinking, not smoking, not toking, all that kind of stuff, if you want to do that, have fun, go for it, but just don't expect to be number one. Well, you know, I'll tell you the one thing that I miss about motocross, and that's hanging out with my crew at the Nationals. We had such fun, you know, outside of the track, because whenever you get to the track, it was business. But outside of the track, we used to have so much fun. You know, that's what I miss. That's what I miss. I won't even say the most. That's what I miss. I miss the racing, because it was good racing. When there was shitty racing, it was like, I don't know. You know, like I don't know if I calculated it, but I did 25 years of pro nationals. I didn't miss a Friday, let alone a Saturday and a Sunday. So I saw a lot of racing. I saw the best racing in the country for decades. So, you know, I've moved on. You know, right now I work, I still do work, and I trade stocks and options and futures and stuff, but I've got a renewed interest now in hockey. I play hockey 3 times a week. I've actually played pickleball with old people that kick my ass. And you know, the traveling and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, and just lately I bought myself an electric mountain bike because my good buddy Paul Kingsley, Kinger, he's an animal at it. He's really good, and he's, you know, like we go to a place that's about a half an hour from where I live, and we go at it. So I do that just to stay in shape. So, and you know, and I said to him after a couple times that I rode, I said, I'm glad that I had a little bit of motocross background in this, because otherwise I'd be eating shit everywhere. Everywhere you go. Like, I had to cut my bars down because I'd be whacking trees all the time and body checking trees, and you know, I'm not quite up to his level. He's a maniac. He was a very good motocrosser when in the early 80s, and he's a damn good rider right now on the mountain bike. So, you know, other than that, we had our first grandchild in February, who I'm going to see this weekend, and you know, just living life and enjoying it. It's pretty much stress-free.
Final question to wrap it all up.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we'll see you at a Canadian National anytime soon?
No. Never. No interest. I miss it, but not that bad.